give you a little bit of background on me, right? So I'm a K through 12 teacher. Um, Currently working on my Master of Education degree. I teach. I teach this year. I'm a technology teacher. This year I teach magnet computer science, and I also teach engineering and technology design to my non-magnet students, right? And I'm also a hang glider pilot and the SUAS pilot, and I have ADHD. so, so I'm also a neurodivergent pilot, right?
Yep.
And so of course, I've loved aviation since I was a mighty mite. My story is very similar to a lot of people's stories. I was real little, pop brought Top Gun home. I saw it, and I was hooked. I was like, yeah, I gotta fly, right? And it was like that ever since. And then in third grade, I started playing this video game called Track and Field 2, and that's how I discovered hang gliding and got hooked again. It was like, all right, yep, now I want to do this. And so here I am. To make a very long story short, all my journeys have kind of converged, right? I'm like, all right, now that I'm seeing that the FAA has this view towards ADHD, maybe my path in my 40s is to work on that, right?
Yeah.
On the back end, I'm starting to use coder terms, right? The back end work is going to be facilitating IEP meetings and 504 meetings in schools so that special education people and counselors who more often than not know nothing about aviation, even in aviation magnet schools, helping them say, all right, this IEP process that you're going to do, whether you know it or not, the FAA is going to ask for this IEP during the meeting. So let's use that to our advantage and put IEP goals that are aviation specific. And on the front end, it's going to be talking to the FAA like, you don't think you need to ease up just a little bit? Maybe you need to change your policies on medication. Maybe you need to look at the research showing that the ADHD medication actually makes people operate vehicles better, right? And somewhere in the middle, like looking at what 504 plans would look like, because Section 504 applies to the workplace as well as schools. So what's a 504 plan for a pilot like? At an airline, at a commuter line, at a non-scheduled airline, at a flight school, etc. Right? So, I guess that's kind of where I am. And then in the process of writing this research paper that I just turned in for one of my classes, I found your article, and that's when I decided to reach out to you.
No, I really appreciate you reaching out. This is, it's interesting. So a little history in the article. Attitude Magazine had posted probably like 2 years ago, saying, "Hey, we're looking for veterans that have some sort of connection, with neurodiversity and that kind of stuff. That wouldn't mind being interviewed for like this big, lengthy, veteran. Hey, look, you could be in the military and you can have neurodiverse traits and stuff, and it's not necessarily, world-ending kind of thing."
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, hey, I was recently diagnosed. So I was diagnosed as an adult. I didn't get diagnosed until I was about 36 with ADHD and about 38 with Asperger's. So with that, I was like, hey, newly diagnosed, I'm really learning a lot about myself. And I want to share this with people because I don't think when people look at neurodiverse folks, I really think that all they see is, that maybe like 5% of the population that really are, extra specially challenged, right? The folks who are like, hey, they're probably never going to leave their parents' house. The folks who are Rain Man running around with all kinds of numbers and shit in their head and that kind of stuff, that's what they think of and that's what they see, society see. And I'm like, that's not what my experience has been. And as I've done more research into this, at those days and then even more so, for a number of years since, that is not the predominance of the neurodiverse community, the spectrum of things. And then, of course, throw in all of the DE&I efforts that were all kind of kicking in, with the events of George Floyd and that kind of stuff. Folks are talking a lot about race and talking a lot about how to work in these environments and things. And I was like, well, hey, folks, I kind of came up with the concept of, hey, if we look at people not so much from their color, their sex, their gender, and that kind of stuff, but we look at them from the perspective of how do they think? You got two types of people. It's real simple. You got neurotypicals and neurodiverse.
Right.
Real simple. And if you apply neurodiverse leadership principles to both neurodiverse and neurotypicals, what are you doing? Well, you're looking at the individual. You're seeing what they need. You're providing them with the guidance and the resources and stuff like that they need to be successful. And when you do that, you get more out of the people that work with you. And that doesn't matter whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical. It doesn't matter if they're black, white, purple, green, orange. It doesn't matter if they're...
Hey, I lost you. You there? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I still see you logged in, but I don't see you on the mic, and I don't see you. Okay. Hang on. I hear you now. There you are. There you are. Now I got you back. All right. Yeah, not sure what happened there.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
weirdest thing ever. It's like my entire computer like partially reset or something. So I was like, that's really weird. But like I said, anyway, you've got all different kinds of people, and if you just treat people by the way that they think, and you apply what those people need to be successful, it's amazing what you can get done. And so that kind of was, kind of how part of the journey of all this has kind of come along, was trying to share things and try to grow stuff. And as I was sitting down talking with Ed Magazine on all this, they were just like, "You've got such insight. You like, can we just do an article on you?" I was like, well, I mean, if you want to, I guess it's your article. I mean, I had this whole thing about me. It's all about veterans, and it's about people. It's about, doing things different and that kind of stuff. And, it's not about me per se, but I'm like, okay, sure. If you want to do this, we can do this. So we sat down and chatted, and they, took all kinds of good stuff, whatever it was, and they put in the article, and voila, it's there. Well, you're probably at least the 8th or 9th person I've talked to since that article got published about this exact topic, right? And trying to do more, or so that, I mean, there are folks that are military folks right now that either are showing symptoms or they have symptoms of ADHD. They're gotten diagnosed with ADHD. They're afraid to get diagnosed with ADHD because they're actively flying. And so it's like, well, what do I do now? Sort of thing. As well as I've had, mothers of kids who, are wanting to be in the aerospace business and go fly and that kind of stuff. And they've got diagnosed as children because we're much better at this now and trying to take care of kids. And they're like, what kind of medicines can we take? She's like, I've got a PhD and an MD in pharmacy that I'm working with. She's like, look, I've researched all of the medicine and stuff like that the FAA is approved and things, and they are like 50 years behind on all the things that are normal for current medicines and concerns and that kind of stuff, right? Not just ADHD meds, and psychological meds, but just
There you are. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Sometimes Google acts up. I can see you again, but I can't hear you. Let me see.
This.
There you are. Okay.
This has never done this to me before. I have absolutely no idea what's going on. I apologize for all that, but I'll try and be brief then. So the reality of it is they want to do an article, and so here I am. I'm happy to do an article with them. So write it all down. Like I said, I've had a few folks reach out to it and things. And what I've learned is there is a very large interest in this particular environment, right? Because what I saw when I was on active duty was, I never thought I was different. I thought I was kind of like everybody else, right? Especially, so I bounced around from airframe to airframe quite a bit, which is not normal. A lot of guys end up staying with one airframe, when they're in the military for a long time. And so I had just kind of way I worked my career. I was able to kind of bounce from airframe to airframe as I kind of took a new job, or as I was advancing, I could go laterally into another aircraft and go do something else and then come back or something like that. So very ADHD and how all that stuff kind of played itself out. But I had a chance to kind of see a lot of the different communities. And, I really felt like I was just like everybody else, I may have been a little bit different in one community versus another or something, but like specifically take the attack community where I was an Apache guy for a while, I was exactly the same. All those guys think the same, act the same, do this. We're all exactly the same. And so later on in my career, when I get diagnosed with ADHD, I'm just like, well, wait a minute here. There's no way I'm the only dude
Exactly. Right.
who has been diagnosed with ADHD and flies. And if you look at, what does it take to be a pilot? Right? What does it take to be a really good pilot? Well, you got to be able to focus on about 6 things at once.
Yep.
You got to be able to, I had 8 radios going off in the back of my head. I'm looking for bad guys. I'm shooting bad guys. I'm trying not to hit another aircraft. I'm trying to coordinate with people, in my aircraft, another aircraft on the ground. And I did that with like wizardry skill. Like there's many folks that were just kind of, how do you do all that? I'm like, I don't know. It just kind of comes naturally. Right. And this was all pre-diagnosis and pre-medicine. So, as I look into this more, I'm like, there have got to be more guys just like me.
Right.
And I'm learning more and more that there's a lot of guys that are out there that are probably just like me. But the biggest thing is, and you hit on it exactly, is the FAA is so behind on their concepts and on their, their design for what is approved and not approved and that kind of stuff when it comes to things like ADHD or anxiety or other stuff like that, that the reality is guys are too afraid to go get help because they know if they go get help, they're going to get grounded. They're going to go through some sort of crazy long-term process. And it's like, this is how people make money. This is how people live their lives. They can't afford to take a 6, 9, 12, 18-month break from flying when that's what they need to do to put, food on their table. Right. And they don't have another skill to fall back on because they're a pilot, And so as I look at all this, I'm like, okay, one, we need to completely change how we as a aviation community look at mental health, first off. And I can appreciate that. I went to NBA this year. I live in Orlando, and NBA just happened to be here in Orlando this year. And they actually did a lot of conversation about mental health. And, because coming out of COVID, what they're realizing is there's a lot of pilots that are having anxiety issues and stuff like that coming out of COVID. And they're blaming it on COVID, right? They're saying, oh, well, because all of us had, a rough time and during COVID, stuff like that, pilots had a rough time too. And so therefore they need to get some chance to look at. I'm like, I would argue that's just been there all along.
It's been all along, right?
It hasn't just popped up in the last year. It's not like we've had decades and decades of super normal, non-affected pilots, and then COVID hits, and oh my gosh, we got all these problems.
Right.
No, I think it's always been there. COVID may have just opened the lid on it. I'll give you that.
It was a straw that broke the camel's back.
And so the reality is the FAA is really having to look a lot harder at what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it in regards to medicine, that kind of stuff. But the problem that the FAA has is there are 4 doctors that work at the FAA headquarters that are approved to sign off on, second look, if you will, HIMSS looking, medical records, that kind of stuff, to include the doctor who is the FAA surgeon, the air surgeon for America. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Right.
In my 1 brigade, right? So there are 10 aviation brigades in the Army, active, not non-special operations brigades. There's probably at least a couple of more. Each brigade had 5 or 6 flight surgeons in each brigade. You mean to tell me the FAA has 4 for the entire flying community? And you're going to restrict all, BH meds and that kind of stuff, reviews and things to be approved by one of those 4 flight surgeons? You have lost your mind.
Right.
And no wonder nobody is, 1, getting a whole lot of progress done. 2, people are concerned that they're going to lose their flying and they'll never get it back. Because what's easier, just deny a guy or go through a process with them that's going to take 6, 8, 10, 12 months? when you already have a backup of a whole bunch of other folks that are already backed up 6, 8, 10, 12 months trying to go through the process. So, you know, and if I'm just a guy, you know, out there flying and stuff like that, whatever it was and things, it's easy for me to go get some St. John's wort or something like that, whatever it was, you know, and go to sleep, wake up, and just go back to doing what I hyper focus on, which is flying, and not worry about everything else, even though I am at a greater risk of having accidents, you know, incursions, you know, making poor decisions in the cockpit than I would be if I just got it treated.
If you just got it treated.
So I talked with the you know, the air surgeon a little bit while she was down here for NBAA, and I was like, look, if I can help you with anything, if I can put you in touch with people, I'm like, I am more than happy, you know. And don't get me wrong, right? I'll be the first person to say not every neurodiverse person needs to have access to a pilot's license.
That's right.
Not every neurotypical person needs to have access to a pilot's license. So it's not like we're saying something super, you know, out of the box, wow, kind of, you know, comment. But at the same token, let's look at it from the other perspective. Just because they're neurodiverse does not mean they shouldn't have access to a pilot's license, right? And so, and just like you're saying, you know, if they're getting treated and they've got the right medicine and they're doing all the right things, then they're safer than maybe some of the other neurotypicals that are out there, and or the neurodiverse folks that aren't being treated. And so, so that's where, you know, I've kind of become, you know, I do aviation stuff in kind of a normal business and things, but on the side, I'm very much into being a neurodiversity advocate and trying to help people understand neurodiversity and looking at it from a different perspective, right? So I was a night stalker. I've flown with the, you know, top 1% of helicopter pilots in the world. I've done combat deployments. I've shot people, you know, that, you know, shot bad guys for a living. I've taken, you know, Rangers and Delta and SEAL Team 6 guys and stuff like that to nasty places in the world and coming back. And I did all of that before being diagnosed. If I'd been diagnosed before I joined the Army, none of that would have happened.
That's
all because of some silly little title. Not because of my ability, because obviously I have the ability to do it. I proved I had the ability to do it, even without the support and the medicine, that kind of stuff. So I'm like, what's really limiting? Let's really get down to brass tacks and find out what's really limiting. Is limiting the fact that I have a title, or is limiting the fact that we've done an evaluation and we know at what threshold is too much for this individual, and we say that yes, this person meets the threshold of being able to be a pilot and go fly, immaterial of category, or no, and here's why, right? And I would argue the no, and here's why group is substantially smaller than the yes, and here's why group.
Right. Absolutely. But so a lot of the things you said went right into one of the first questions I had, right?
Yeah.
I proposed when I was doing some of this research that perhaps if we approached it from an accommodation issue, right? Maybe some aircraft are more ADHD friendly than others. You've flown quite a few. What do you think of that?
I would say so, right? So, and to be fair with you, I would say there are more complex aircraft that are probably better for a neurodiverse person to be, you know, flying than maybe a less complex aircraft. So for instance, right, and you probably see this all the time, especially within education things, like how many, you know, neurodiverse kids show up, whatever it was, and they suck at English.
Yep.
They just suck at it. It's boring. It's Julius Caesar, it's, you know, William Shakespeare, something like that. And they don't get it. It doesn't make sense to them, whatever it was. But as soon as you put a tool in their hand, or as soon as you put a problem for them to fix, or as soon as you put a what if question in front of them, they just absolutely go to town.
Right.
So when it comes down to it, like, okay, you know, for instance, this is easy example, you know, does it make more sense to put a neurodiverse person in the cockpit than being a steward or a stewardess? I would say absolutely, because the neurodiverse person probably, in generalizations, don't have the same customer service skills that you would get out of someone who is maybe neurotypical and is more accustomed to dealing with people who have, you know, the similar mindsets and similar needs and that kind of stuff. Whereas a neurodiverse person, you know, take an autistic guy, make him a steward on, you know, in first class on a 747 going to, you know, Beijing or something. He's probably going to piss off a lot of folks.
Right.
Just
right.
not intentionally per se, but I mean, just that's probably not where their strong suit is. But I put them in the right seat of that 747, and I gave them the training to do it, and that's something that they're interested in. They're going to be the subject matter expert on every single, digital page, every single, schematic, every single, engineering design concept, or whatever it was that is going on with that aircraft. So when something was to happen, right? This is the helicopter guy coming at me, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a helicopter guy, we're always worried about something's going to break. And what do you do about it? Something's going to break. What do you do about it? Something's going to break. What do you do about it? Well, as an airplane guy, it's kind of like, I'll turn it off, pull a circuit breaker, glide until I can land.
Right.
Because I'm on altitude and I got time. Nothing's really that big a deal. Oh, hey, look, the engine's on fire. All right, we'll just turn it off.
Right.
Whatever. As a helicopter guy, I'm like, holy crap, what's going on? All kinds of things. There's a lot more anxiety producing event, but I would argue, and this is actually a good comparison of a combat scenario that I dealt with. I was a battle captain where I was responsible for managing, about 40 aircraft that were up and running at all times, day and night, and that kind of stuff, for about a 12-hour shift. And I partnered with another buddy of mine. I did mostly night shift. He did mostly day shift. And when I would come in, there'd be times where there'd be activities going on and stuff. And this buddy of mine, nothing negative said to him, but just kind of how the stress response occurred in him. Something happened, big, small, didn't matter. He would flat lose his mind for 20 minutes. Lose his mind. Just like, oh my God, this is happening. Just throwing his arms up the air. And after 20 minutes, and that was his stress response. Right. It's just how he responded to stress. He got through his little 20-minute little tirade or whatever it was and things. And then he said, okay, let's buckle down and get this thing done. I'm like, I would walk in and be like, can we just skip all that? Can we just get from, hey, something's occurred to let's start making decisions and working, and skip that whole stress response craziness that's causing all kinds of headache and anxiety? Because it's not just me working here. There's about another dozen folks that are working here and causing all kinds of heartache and pain and that kind of stuff. Because they're all losing their mind as he's losing his mind because he's the one supposed to be in charge. But he just kind of sat down and was like, hey, man, okay, cool, this thing's happened. Let's go to the checklist. Let's go to the little battle book. Let's go to find out what's going on, and we'll go knock all this stuff out. And the anxiety-producing, super stressful environment was actually quite calming for me. Because, I do well in chaos. And I think a lot of folks who are neurodiverse actually do quite well in chaos. That stimuli coming in actually does very good for us because it almost is that extra, increase in dopamine, increase in sensory, increase in everything that's going on. And all of that actually calms us down and allows us to focus. Whereas the neurotypical world, it makes their heads go explode and then they got to figure out how to bring it all back down naturally. Whereas for us, it's just the reverse. So I would say, short hop flights, critical, passenger movements. I would say, environments where it's like, hey, I need somebody to fly around, the president of Botswana. Okay, cool. Right. I would love a neurodiverse guy to fly around the president of Botswana because that guy is probably highly attuned to what he's doing, highly attuned to the aircraft. When I put an aircraft on, I always felt like I was one with the aircraft. I never felt like it was like me and a machine and we're trying to figure this thing out. Man, I put that thing on and I felt like I was, I don't know, like a transformer or something like that. I put it on and I am now a part of this thing. In every aircraft I ever flew. As a hang glider guy, you kind of will understand this concept, right? When you get inside of a hang glider, the reality of it is you got to be able to kind of feel the aircraft, right? How wide it is, how big it is, how tall. You got to kind of feel that sensation, and it takes some time to figure that out, right? So when you start talking airplanes and stuff like that, hey, it's a 200-foot airplane, it's a 400-foot airplane. How do you feel that? A lot of folks, it takes a lot of time, right? When do you start your turn so you don't go off the dang taxiway or whatever it was, trying to kill yourself and everybody else or whatever it was? Well, I got to go 50 feet past and make that. I never had those problems. I always naturally knew how big things were. I flew -7s, which are 45,000-pound airplanes and stuff that are 4-engine large turboprops, about 2/3 the size of a C-130. And then I flew Apaches, which are kind of small and narrow. I flew King Airs, and then I flew Chinooks and stuff. And I could just feel. I'm going to take a Chinook, which is about 100 by 200 foot helicopter. I'm going to put it in a square that is exactly 100 by 200 foot. And I don't need to worry about how much drift or this is what's going on in a brownout at night with people. It's like, okay, I just feel that environment, and I'm connected to the aircraft in such a way that I'm not worried about going into small, tight places and that kind of stuff, because that was never a concern of mine as I transitioned and flew, because I was a part of that system. I think a lot of neurodiverse folks, because of our hyper focus, maybe because of just our highly attuned sensory nature in some aspects, right? You know, that we're much better at stuff like that than maybe our neurotypical counterparts are, where they kind of have to either force it or just rote memorization, learn it over time, and then they too get just as good, right? I'm not saying that, you know, we always have the upper hand. Well, at some point we're probably both pretty good, right? You know, but there are certain things that may just take time. Great example. It took me a long time to learn how to hover. I was not the first guy in my class to learn how to hover. So the way that they work it out at Fort Rucker when you go through flight training is they put you out there in the helicopter and stuff, get you comfortable, kind of like doing some basic approaches, basic upper air work and stuff, because it's pretty simple. Physics are pretty simple. You don't have to worry too much about, you know, hey, what are your feet doing? What are your hands doing? What's your head doing? Don't have to worry about all that stuff, right?
Right.
But eventually, after about 5, 6, 10 hours, something like that, doing that, they try to teach you to hover, because bottom line is, if you can't hover a helicopter, you're not ever going to be able to fly a helicopter.
That's right.
Right. You got to learn how to hover. And so they call it the hover button. And there's nothing about the aircraft that actually has a button that says, hey, I'm going to come to a hover, boop, push a button, comes to a hover, right? Not that simple. Even advanced aircraft, you still have to force the aircraft into a hover. You may have a lot of assisting mechanisms to keep it, but you got to put the aircraft there every time. And so they call it the hover button, because what ends up happening is the synapses in your brain actually have to grow together to be able to actually hover an aircraft. So it's literally a moment ago you can't, and the next moment you can. It's just that simple. And it all comes down to how quickly and how well those synapses in your brain form a cohesive connection. And so that's what they call the hover button, you know, and everyone either gets the hover button or they don't, right? Most folks do. If you put in the time and effort into it, stuff like that, it's not that complicated. It's kind of like playing the drums, right? You know, is everyone going to be, you know, a Lars from Metallica, you know, amazing drummer kind of guy? No, probably not. But if you put enough time and effort into it, can you play the drums? Okay, sure, right? Anyone can learn how to play the drums with your feet and your hands and making everything go, and it just takes time and effort, right? But for me, it took me a lot longer to get there. I didn't realize what was causing it at the time, but I later on thought about it. It's like, well, it's probably a mixture of sensory, right? Because one of the things that you go through, right? You got 3 primary sensors, right? You got your eyes, you got your vestibular system, and then you got your butt. And so your eyes can tell you one thing, and it's really easy to believe what your eyes tell you. And your ears can tell you one thing, and it's sometimes easy to believe that too. And then your butt's telling you something, and it's really easy to believe that one too. And so the problem is, how do you filter all that out when you in your whole life have never really had a good sensory filter in the first place, right? Because most neurodiverse folks are more sensitive, we'll just say, right? A lot of us are more sensitive to what's going on, whether that be lights or sounds or activities or smells or whatever. We're just generally more sensitive. Right. So does it take a little bit longer maybe to teach a guy how to hover who's neurodiverse, because he's more attuned to all those other senses? So he's got to figure out what to dampen, what to accept, what's true, what's not, and figure all of that out while he's also trying to figure out how to drum. So all this stuff kind of happens at one time. Whereas maybe when the neurotypical guy shows up, he's like, okay, look at this, make your hands do this, and you'll learn how to hover. Okay, well, if I look at this and my hands do this, I learn how to hover. And there are some guys who are 3rd or 4th time to pick at the aircraft, they can hover. And it just comes to them naturally like that. We don't know why. It just is. And then there's some guys that never learn or have a significantly hard time learning how to hover. Why is that? I don't know. I like to assume it may have something to do with sensory input and the ability to filter and process all that sensory input. But once you figure out how to do that as a neurodiverse guy, I think you do it better than anybody else does. Because you can, it's almost like having to learn how to like cut down a tree with a scalpel.
Mm.
Right? So it's like, not only can I cut down a tree with a scalpel, it's going to take me a long time. But you know what I'm also going to have? I'm going to have fine cuts. I'm going to be very precise. I'm going to know exactly how to make this tool do what I want it to do and make the end result be what I want it to be, rather than taking a hatchet or a battle axe to a tree, which may be just as effective. Not saying that it's not going to take a tree down, but are you going to get the same finite, precise results? Maybe not. You may get the same result, but I would like to think that because neurotypical folks are neurodiverse folks, I should say, are more attuned to multiple sensory input, that once we figure out how to put it all together, we are much more precise in what we're doing. So precision air show work, I think, has a perfect environment for like neurodiverse people and that kind of stuff, because you got to be able to take in lots of input. You got to be able to live in a chaotic, confusing environment, and that kind of stuff would be just absolutely, very comfortable environment for a neurodiverse person to probably be in.
And now I got a whole bunch of questions. And being mindful, and that's exactly why I got this, so I won't like lose them, right?
Sure.
So like, what's the maximum G load you've ever had to deal with when on any of the aircraft that you've flown?
So on a regular basis, the maximum G load is probably about 2.5 or 3 Gs.
Okay.
I have done up to about 7.
Okay.
So as I was doing some more high altitude training and that kind of stuff, one of the things that the Army likes to do is they like to get you out and do some additional essentially it's aerobatic flying is really what it is, but it's also, it's more like recovery stuff, right? So because oftentimes we'll take an airplane that is going to be flown typically at some sort of max cruise airspeed or something like that, because you want to get from point A to point B as quick as you can, right? That's the whole point of flying, is you get from A to B a lot faster, a lot more efficient, that kind of stuff. Well, when doing spy plane work, I don't want to get from A to B really fast. I want to be as slow as I possibly can so I can collect as much information as I'm going from A to B. So we'll put aircraft into, I would say, near stalling condition, but that's probably the closest thing that I can kind of get to, in a more stall acceptable condition than I would be if I was going at cruise speed. Right. Because they're going to fly a lot slower. We're going to pull the props back. We're going to do, fly at higher pitch angles and deck angles and stuff like that than normal, which is, especially at higher altitudes, and you start getting into cooler air and that kind of stuff, it makes it a lot harder to control the aircraft, and or a lot easier to get into a spin, to get into something else. And so they send guys through spin recovery training and that kind of stuff, just to make sure that if you were ever to get in that environment, let's make sure that you're at least trained to be able to recover, rather than take this beautiful $80 million airplane or whatever it was and make it a big hole in the dirt with you inside of it. So we would go out to like Phoenix and APS is the company who does a lot of the training for the Army and stuff. I think it's Aviation Precision Solutions or something like that. That's what they're called. And they do a lot of like spin recovery, high altitude training and stuff like that, and it's designed for really anybody, corporate jet guys, all the way down to tactical military guys and that kind of stuff, but teaches them how to do that. And so one of the things that they do also is, hey, let's go out there and teach you a little bit about G loading and understanding what that really means when you start doing that at altitude and that kind of stuff. And so, I want to say we hit 6, 7, 8 G, something like that, once or twice. And so just like everybody else who is totally normal, stuff like that, is it difficult? Is it hard to breathe? You got to, do all of your, sucking and breathing and pushing maneuvers and stuff like that, or whatever it was, and things like everybody else does. Sure, absolutely, right? You're still human. But I wouldn't say that, I could accept more or less G loading based off of my, neurodiversity or not, to be honest with you. I would say that, we're all still human, and I would say that we're not limited by our ability to for neurodiversity to be able to do that. If that it becomes a concern. You know what I'm saying?
That was exactly what I was thinking about, right? So I was just kind of wondering, like, how do those sensory mechanisms come in when you're like when you're doing that? Because I mean, I haven't flown anything that really has a heavy G load, right?
Sure.
The maximum G load I've probably experienced maybe one and three quarters of a G, maybe.
Okay.
And you barely feel that, right? It's just like roller coaster G's. And so, but that was kind of, but then you kind of went into the precision air show, right? I kind of have a idea of ranking career pilot professions, order from least ADHD friendly to most ADHD friendly, right?
Sure.
Because one of the things, and I'm approaching this from a educator sitting on an IEP team meeting, right? So like in schools, like once they determine that the student has special needs, they'll either go the IEP route, individualized educational plan, or they'll go the Section 504 route, right? The 504 isn't exactly as the requirements are a little less strict than the IEP plans are, but in both meetings a team is put together, right? And so one of the things that I and a couple of other special education teachers, well, I'm not a special education teacher, but I talked to a couple of special ed teachers about this. And one of the things that they talk about the goals is like sitting down and saying, all right, is this for you, right? Is this for you? But then we kind of went all over the place and got to the point where it's like, there are different ways to be career pilots. We don't have to have an airline-centric approach to this, right? Even though the airlines are probably a big, huge chunk of sources of employment. But there's other things you can do. You can go be a helicopter pilot for the police or for the news.
Absolutely.
You can go be an agricultural pilot. You can go fly a banner, advertisement banner. You can be a CFI, right? There's some people that are lifelong CFIs. I personally have no interest in flying for the airlines.
Me neither.
And I but I want, in addition, my goal right now is to be a CFI in the classroom, right? Give children in middle and high school access to low cost or free flight training. And so that's kind of what I'm working towards now. So I'm looking at being like a lifelong CFI.
Yeah.
And there are different approaches, right? Your opinion, least friendly ADHD profession, what do you think it would be?
To be honest with you, I would say probably the long haul FedEx, UPS kind of pilot, right?
International flights.
That would probably be the least ADHD friendly, would be my assumption, mostly because, so the way we called it when we were doing, spy plane ops and stuff like that when I was in Korea and things flying King Airs, the first 30 minutes is always assholes and elbows, right? You're always busy, you're getting to altitude, you're talking to this guy, talking to that guy, whatever was things. But the next, for us, it was about 5 or 6 hours, you're bored out of your mind.
Right.
Doing absolutely nothing. You get established wherever you're going, and you're just going to sit there and just like read a book. We had guys who brought movies.
Right.
We had guys who, I had a guy who got his master's and PhD while sitting on track. He'd do homework. He'd write up stuff like completely. Now again, we're still flying an airplane.
Right.
Airplane's still going. Right. But it's absolutely some of those boring flying you're probably going to come across. The thing I would liken to that in the civilian world is probably, because again, no matter where you go, the first 30 minutes of flight are always going to be assholes and elbows, right? As you're doing the star, you're going to departing, you're trying to, doing your procedures, you're talking to this guy, talking to that guy, getting to altitude, doing all the things you got to do. If you got people in the back, we'll say you're always, flipping switches and turning people on, talking to stewards and stewardesses and things, and you're always busy. until you get to, all right, we're on course. We have 300 miles between here and the next reporting point. 300 miles at 400 knots is like 45 minutes. So, yeah, we're just going to sit here for 45 minutes. Just stare at shit.
You know what that tells me?
Yeah.
If we ever get to a point, and hopefully we will, where we have more CFIs that are more neurodivergent, pedagogy and andragogy literate, is that there needs to be a talk about what I would call cruise altitude executive function. And that is all the stuff that happens at cruise altitude, right? Because Russell Barkley is a big time ADHD psychologist, therapist, expert. He recommends that drivers with ADHD do not use cruise control. In fact, studies have shown that when a person with ADHD is driving a manual transmission, the executive function issues are almost completely eliminated. Like they're more attentive, etc. Right?
I can see that.
Now, if we were to try to find meaning for that in cockpit variation, like, would there be a difference between operating traditional instruments in a glass cockpit, or like maybe some of the other automated features that some aircraft have? And
yeah, I would say, you know, when it comes to so again, great example would be like, you know, high altitude corporate flying, long distance flying, high altitude, you know, commercial flying and things like that. You know, working for you know, a business or industry where they're checking your engines, you're checking your fuel flows and stuff like that, and they're wanting to make sure that you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Once you have all that stuff established and you don't mess with anything, I agree with you that yes, as a neurodiverse person, you're probably not going to do well in that environment. Not going to do as well in that environment because your mind and your hands and stuff is like, I can't just sit here.
Right.
I can't just not do something. Right.
Right.
You know, so that's where I would say, you know, some sort of mission focused aviation flying is probably what's best for the neurodiverse community, which is the reason why stuff like being an Apache pilot works out really well. Being an EMS pilot, you know, for, you know, state of Maryland, whatever it was, works out really well. Being there's guys who are always on call to, you know, move you know, body part you know, transplants and stuff like heart transplants and stuff like that. You know, guys who are on call for that kind of a stressful environment to be able to jump in, quick, go. And okay, maybe the en route stuff isn't necessarily going to change much, but you're focused on the mission. You're not just focused on takeoff and landing. Right. Takeoff and landing happens whether you want to or not, right? As soon as you take off, the landing is coming whether you like it or not. Right. So there's no real challenge, I guess, to the concept of I'm going to take off and I'm going to have to land this thing eventually. It's the stuff that's in the middle that becomes the challenge. Well, if I can take that challenge in the middle and make it productive, because I'm focused on the mission at hand, whatever that is, right? And again, maybe it's aerobatics. Maybe it's, I thought of one a minute ago, you know, TV helicopters or, you know, doing work as like a NOAA pilot, you know, flying, you know, headhunter, you know, hurricane hunter missions and stuff like that, right? Working aerial firefighting and going out to, you know, the out west or whatever it was and putting fires out and stuff like that, doing water bombing and that kind of stuff, right? So we need people to do that kind of work. And maybe that is a good environment for the neurodiverse community, a little bit more than the, you know, the more corporate airline type of environment. Do I think that folks can do well in those environments too? Absolutely. But you probably, and this gets back to kind of more crew training, I guess, and really more education at the airline and the corporate, you know, flight department level of, okay, if you get a neurodiverse dude that comes on board with you and is going to fly with you and stuff like that because he's the right fit or she's the right fit for your team or something like that, okay, take into account that that's what they're doing. Maybe not every flight is take off with the boss, fly 8 hours and drop them off. Maybe he needs to go out and, hey, he becomes your maintenance guy. And he's going to go out and do maintenance checks on the aircraft, right? The guy who's going to go out there and do, you know, certification flying and stuff like that for the aircraft. Make sure it's meeting all of the requirements as it's coming out of schedule on schedule maintenance or something like that. Things like that. Keep them busy doing not necessarily busy work, right?
Yeah.
But it's productive work that needs to be done that keeps their mind focused on some kind of purposeful mission, if that kind of makes sense. And so long as you're doing that, we can still do the mundane, right? I still pay my taxes every year.
Right.
I still get up and take a shower and brush my teeth and take my daughter to school and walk my dog, and I still do all those things that I have to do, the mundane of life, whether I'm neurodiverse or neurotypical, it doesn't matter. However, I can fill my life with enough purpose in between all that enables me to have the motivation and the drive and that kind of stuff to do the mundane while also doing the purposeful life stuff that I really enjoy.
Right.
And so what that forces organizations to probably really do is start thinking outside the box a little bit more on how do I employ my people to get the best out of them, not from the perspective of, I love Simon Sinek, I believe in everything that he talks about. And so he has a quote where he's like, hey, getting the most out of your people isn't like taking a wet towel and trying to wring more water out of it. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do here is empower them with the right resources, tools, skills, abilities, what have you, to take what they do naturally plus what the organization needs and give them what they need to produce 100% or more of what they're willing to offer the organization, right? And that's what getting more out of people really is. How do you do that? Well, you do that through motivation, you do that through experience, you do that through trust, you do that through a lot of things. And as you give people more opportunities to prove their value and their worth to the organization, now they're willing to give you more because they believe that you trust them and are willing to allow them to do more because of what you're offering, what you're giving them. And I think neurodiverse folks really do well in those environments because it's one of those things of, okay, hey, I tell my bosses all the time, you tell me what my left and right limits are, and I will go find you work. I will do all kinds of things, but I need some pretty solid left and right limits. If you don't give me left and right limits, I'm going to be all over the place. But if you give me left and right limits, realize I'm going to go bouncing back and forth between them. I am not a center of the line guy. I never will be, but that's not why you hired me, right? Because everybody else can find the center of the line opportunities. I'm going to be the guy who's sniffing out everything you can possibly find and then bring all that stuff back in and say, here's what I found. What do you do about it now, right? So that's where I think neurodiverse folks would do really well, is in environments where they can leverage their hyper focus, they can leverage their sensory understandings, they can leverage their innate interests in, again, if you're a pilot, all of us pilots probably have some kind of mechanical thinking background, right? You just kind of have to. You can't sit here and be a pilot and not understand how the engine works, how the hydraulic system works, how the AC system works. You got to understand how that stuff works. And so as you're sitting up there troubleshooting or doing other things and stuff like that, you got to kind of understand how these things work. Maybe the thing to do is just run some sort of like ground school kind of refresher class every week, every 2 weeks or something like that, and have your neurodiverse guys just get up there and just teach classes.
Exactly. Right.
It doesn't have to be super complicated. It doesn't even have to necessarily be in the cockpit. It could be, let's leverage what they do well and let them share that with others. And I would argue that goes for anybody. If you take someone who does something well and let them share that with others, one, they're going to get the intrinsic value of being able to share something they do well with others, and they're going to feel good about it. And then number two, they're going to build this rapport with the organization and say, hey, you guys trust me in wanting to do this. I would like to do more of this. And then you can grow something that is fruitful for the organization, rather than you have a whole bunch of folks who are, what are they calling it? There's a new term that's out there that's thrown around. It's like, where you basically, you quit while at work and you're basically not doing any work and stuff. You just kind of show up to work and do nothing. because there's a lot of remote work, right? So a lot of folks are just like, hey, unless you tell me to do something, I'm not going to do a thing.
Right.
And so you can get away from some of those things that are concerns for organizations because you've empowered people to do what they like, what they enjoy while at work. And I think you can leverage that with neurodiverse folks pretty easily, to be honest with you, by saying, hey, what are your top 5 interests, right? And it can be ridiculous shit. It doesn't matter what you think it is. It can be totally ridiculous to you, but if it's something that they enjoy, is like, cool, how can I leverage whatever that is? I love playing, Pokemon Go. Cool. Okay. So you like finding little random things that are missing, and going out there and doing the hard work to try and find it and put it back together. Okay, cool. Well, we've got some help that we need to be doing in our, records department, that kind of stuff, because we're finding issues and we're not really sure where they're coming from. So we need somebody to dig into this and help us figure out where the problem is in our records department. Can you help us find the Pokemon in the records?
Right.
Just to figure out where the problem is. And it's like, sure, I can hyper focus on records of something that I really enjoy and something I'm going to fly that's really interested to me and something that's going to be important to me, and dig into whatever this problem is, and then say, hey, here's your 37 problems over 5,000 documents of what the heck is going on, and this is what I think is probably happening. Cool. Let's do something about that, right? And allow people to be involved doing things like that. So I think it gets a lot back down to leadership and understanding how to work with people who are both neurotypical and neurodiverse. And through that, you can put people in, just like you're saying, you can put people in environments where they can succeed because it's something they want to do and they're good at, because we need all of it, right? If you look at the aviation community across the board, we're short pilots, we're short simulator operators, we're short, CFIs, we're short ATC personnel, we're short stewards, we're short, aircraft manufacturers, we're short everything.
Right.
So we aren't in the position of really saying, well, we really don't need your kind here. I don't think we're in a position to be able to say that right now. I think we're saying we want everybody, and just bring me your people and we'll figure out what you're good at and we'll put you at whatever problem ends up being the one that is best for you to solve, because we got all kinds of problems, and maybe it's the pilot problem or the ATC problem or the administrative problem or the airport problem or whatever. And we can get you involved in all kinds of things. And so I think that's where what you're doing is great, and getting folks to kind of think about, hey, there's definitely opportunities here to start kids off early who are interested in this stuff.
Right.
And say, hey, where might be a good career path for you to follow? Hey, you work really well in a stressful environment, but you wear, Coke bottle glasses and you'll probably never be a pilot. Well, that's okay. We can probably work you down the path of being ATC.
That's right.
We need ATC folks, and it's something that you enjoy, something that you like. We can teach you aviation stuff. We can teach you ATC stuff. We can take you out to Washington Dulles or whatever it was and let you go see how they do things in the tower and stuff like that, and do some of the other neat fun. Okay, yeah, this is what I want to do with my life. And now you've produced somebody who's going to join the industry with the background, the experience, the designed, tested, if you will, opportunities to look at how they can best integrate into whatever the industry, or that the industry needs, as well as that individual student may need or want going forward. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. What you're doing.
Thank you so much. I feel like this is a really good place to leave off, right?
Okay.
And like like this is really useful, because we can because if we can just kind of touch, like, based on different aspects of the pilot life and functions and things like that, and look at it from both a training perspective and from an evaluation perspective, I feel like moving forward, it's going to give everybody, young students, teachers, FA psychologists, etc., managers, a good idea on how to move forward and what to do next. Let's definitely be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can help with anything, I'm happy to, writing papers, doing quotes, sitting down, talking with folks, whatever those things. I'm happy to share my experiences with anyone who's willing to listen. Because I'm really, I kind of found my why in life.
Right.
My why in life is really to kind of help other folks break through glass ceilings that shouldn't be there.
Right.
And it really kind of is focused in on the neurodiverse community, but it's also just kind of across the board. I'm like, just because you're Black does not mean that you can't do something. That has the color of your skin and your ability to do something has nothing to impact one versus the other. Now, your skills, your abilities, your talents, what you're willing to do, and your ability to get something done, those two things go together.
Absolutely.
Right? But your color doesn't matter. Your sex doesn't matter. Your gender doesn't matter. How your brain works doesn't matter. We should evaluate every person for what their individual value is, and then apply that to the problem set that is in front of us today. Maybe they can help us with that. Maybe they can't. They go find another job. Either way, we've evaluated the person immaterial of what they look like, sound like, feel like, smell like, but it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
So anything I can do to kind of help you, with this, I'd be more than happy to do. Having more of these conversations, stuff, happy to help however I can.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Nate, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Yeah, awesome. Take care, Gary. We'll definitely be in touch soon.
All right, take care.
All righty, bye-bye.